Hey there, I'm Terry with Tree Marie Soapworks, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this soap. It's using the Ghost Swirl technique that was introduced to us by Clara Lindberg. Clara found out that even by adding no color to your soap, you can have a variation of color in your final bar just by manipulating the water amounts. And she called that the Ghost Swirl, and that is the technique that we did for the October of 2020 soap challenge. I have included links to Clara's blog and also to Amy Warden's Soap Challenge Club in the description below. For me, an unintended consequence of this design was that I got a beautiful textured top, and I feel like that really stole the show for this one. So I'm going to be focusing on this batch, and keep in mind when I put this in the oven, it was completely flat on the top, and as it went through the different stages of gel, it completely changed, and I took pictures of it every so often in the oven, and it's really quite neat to see. I will explain a little bit about water content in soap and how it's figured and different ways to figure it, and at the end of the video I will do the troubleshooting, and also I will show a few more of my tries at the Ghost Swirl technique, so stay tuned to the end of the video. Okay, let's get started. For the design that I have chosen for this batch, I am splitting my batter into 3 equal parts, and 2 of the parts will be the low water soap and 1 of the parts will be the high water soap. So for the first 2 that I measured, I did the low water amount, and that is the one that the lye concentration is 48%. And for the 3rd water amount is the high water soap, and the lye concentration for that is 26%. Since I am dividing my batter equally by 3, the lye amounts will be the same for each of my 3 parts. When I first started making soap, I didn't realize that the water is only there to get the lye dissolved and to mix into the oils. It's not that particular. The only thing is that you can't go less water than you have lye. So a 50-50 mixture is as low as you can go. So when they say water discount, it's a little misleading because usually it is talking about discount from the default in soap calc, and that's 38%, and that is usually only used for hot process soap. Okay, so let's talk about lye concentration. What does that mean? To get the lye concentration, the lye weight and the water weight are added together, and then the lye weight is divided by that total, and that gives you the percentage of lye in your lye water mixture. So for the first 2 waters that I measured, I used a lye concentration of 48%, and that is almost 50-50 water and lye. And for the last water that I measured, I used a percentage of 26%, which is almost 1/4 of the total of the lye water weight is lye. Next, I start to measure my hard oils, starting with my palm kernel flakes. Palm kernel flakes have a higher melting point, so I usually melt those first before I melt my other hard oils that have a lower melting point. While I'm melting those, I start to measure the liquid oils, starting with the avocado oil, then the castor oil, and finally the olive oil. This is an advanced soap making technique, and I'm assuming that you have an understanding of lye safety and the soap calculator. Now that the palm kernel flakes are melted, I go ahead and measure in the coconut oil and then the lard. This base recipe is the same recipe I use for my goat milk soap recipe, and the lard in it makes it very slow moving. But of course you need to pick a slow moving fragrance too to make it slow moving. Once those are melted, I go ahead and add the cocoa butter. I just set that aside, and usually it melts on its own, and if it needs microwaved, I just microwave it very gently until it's just barely melted, but it needs to be clear. The fragrance I chose for this is called Black Tie, and it's from Wholesale Supplies Plus. This fragrance is great because it decelerates your batter. It gives you lots of time to work, and that's important for the design for which I chose. Next, I add the fragrance to the melted hard oils, and then I go ahead and add the liquid oils to that mixture. Next, this mixture of the oils and the fragrance needs to be divided by 3. And I just figure this by weighing the bowl and the contents. Then I subtract off the weight of the bowl and the spatula, and then I divide that number by 3. And then that's your weight for splitting the oils and fragrance 3 ways. I've had a lot of people ask why I don't tear the scale with the weight of that bowl on there, and the answer is I've already weighed different things in different containers since I used that container and teared that out. I don't have another container that is that same weight, so I have to subtract off that manually. Remember, everything is the same in this recipe for each of the 3 parts except for the water. So to figure out the sodium lactate, it's based upon the weight of the oils. So that's going to be the same in each of these 3, and it's 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Sodium lactate is an optional ingredient, and it just helps your soap get a little harder, and it also helps it release from the mold easier. It's completely natural. It's actually made from the fermenting of beets or corn, and it is basically a liquid salt. Next, I strain the lye water into the oils, and it doesn't really matter which goes in which because the oils are all the same. You'll notice the middle one is the one that has the higher concentration of water. You can see that it's completely diluted and no cloudiness. So I didn't even bother to strain that one. This other one I strained, and that is the low water concentration. So the 2 low water ones have a little film in, which is completely normal. Next, I want you to take a look at my mold. I have a divider in there that's meant to divide this 3 ways. It's a homemade divider, and I have a video on how I made this. If you're interested, I'll put a link in here. And then I've clipped these on because the color contrast is very, very hard to see. So it's easy to get lost where you are when you're swirling. So I put some graph paper on there, and when I'm moving my stick back and forth, I'll be able to go from blue to blue, and then purple, purple, blue, blue, purple, purple, and that will help me to be able to keep track of where I am. When I started stick blending these, I was very gentle and kind of went about it very slowly, because when using 2 different lye concentrations, they will thicken up at different rates, and it's not necessarily going to be the way you think it would be. Sometimes I had it do one way, and sometimes I had like the high water be fast, and sometimes I had it be slower acceleration. So you just kind of need to feel it out and see where it's going to go, and just take it very slowly. I noticed that in this particular case, the high water soap, which is the middle one, watch when I stick blend it, it will get a lighter color. And then when I let it sit for a little while, it kind of goes back to the other color, and I think it's emulsified, and then it goes back. And the problem with that is you can have your soap separate after a while, so you need to make sure and get that emulsified. I think if your soap is a high water soap, it is more likely that it will trick you and make you think it's emulsified when it's not, and separate when you've already poured it into your mold. So like I've said in many of my videos, my preferred water amount is the 25% water as a percentage of oil weight. And that's around 35% lye concentration. So in soap calc, that's another way to figure your water weight, is water as a percentage of oil weight, and that's one of the things that you can put in early to figure your water. And this is my preferred method because it's very easy in my mind to figure out. It's just your water weight divided by the total oil weight. I wanted to figure out how to figure my whole recipe manually, and when you do that, you figure out your oils and your lye first, and from that you can figure out the water. It is really easy if you use either the water as a percentage of oil weight or the water to lye ratio, but I always use the water as a percentage of oil weight. So if I know my oils are a certain weight, like say they're 33.5, I just multiply that by my normal water as a percentage of oil weight, and I get my answer of my water weight. So if it's 33.5 and I multiply it by the 25%, I get 8.375. And you can do the same thing for grams, and I do always do my measurements in grams, so it's just in my mind it's easier to know the quantity when I use ounces. As you can see, I'm holding down my dividers as I'm pouring into the different compartments, and I'm using the high water soap in the middle. The third way to figure out water in soap is to use the water to lye ratio. And to figure that out, the ratio is always set up water to lye, and lye is always 1. So to figure out the water part of it, you just take your water weight divided by your lye weight, and that should always be equal to 1 or above. So if you're using 8 ounces of water and 4 ounces of lye, that would be a 2-to-1 ratio. So if I want to reverse engineer that for my own recipe that I'm doing manually, I would have to know what water to lye ratio I'm going to use. And my normal water to lye ratio I use ends up being around 1.8 to 1. So I would set up a proportion. 1.8 over 1 equals X over the lye weight. So I would cross multiply and then divide to solve for X. And that would give me my water weight. And really, since you're always going to be dividing by 1, you really just need to multiply the water ratio by the lye weight to get your water weight. As you can see, I'm just going back and forth, and it is much harder to see in real life than to see this on the camera. I couldn't tell the difference hardly between the different swirls that I was making, so it was really nice to have that little guide on the edges. And I knelt down so I was eye level to the edge of the mold so that I could go back and forth and, like I said, do the colors like the purple, purple, blue, blue, purple, purple, and I kept doing that all the way to the end. Next, I just used a straight edge and lined that up down the center, and then I used another straight edge to go up the sides. I was going for a floral look, and I think it kind of looks like a heliconia. At this point, I just let this sit on the counter until it's set, and then I put it in the oven that's preheated to 145 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's 63 degrees Celsius. And I leave the oven on this time. I also kept the oven light on this whole time so I could see what's going on. Okay, the first photo is when I just put it in the oven. It still looks relatively flat. Next photo is after 30 minutes elapsed time, and it's still set to 145. And now after 1 hour, you can see it starting to change. And next you can really see a lot of definition at 1.5 hours, and this is the point I turned the oven off. Okay, in 2.5 hours elapsed time, this is what it looks like, and at this point I was thinking I probably should have turned the oven off earlier, although I love the result. It came out so cool. This is how it looked the next day, and it really took me a long time to decide how I'm going to cut this. I had it sitting out for probably 3 days before I cut it, because I just really was over the moon at how the top looked, and I didn't really want to cut it up. With this design, it has to be cut horizontally anyway, so I decided just to cut the bottom off horizontally and then decide what to do with the top piece later. I set the height of the wire to 1 inch and passed it through this wire soap slicer from Brambleberry. And here's how it came out. You can see that the middle part is the part that went through gel, and that's the high water part, and the other edges are the low water part. So I mentioned earlier that I like to figure my soaps by water as a percentage of oil weight. So for the high water soap, I use 40% water as a percentage of oil weight, and the low water soap, I used 15% water as a percentage of oil weight. And here I'm just marking my soap for the way that I want to cut it. I'm cutting a little off the end because the ends usually don't have the swirl in as nicely as the middle part. I have a video on why I slant my ruler. If you're interested, I will link it here. We'll get started with the tips and what I've learned from this technique. I learned a lot about water discounts, and I really feel like you can read all you want about this stuff, but when you really do it, you can see it in real life and it sticks in your head better and it really comes to life for you. So I would encourage you to read Auntie Clara's articles and to experiment on your own with this. I also learned that partial gel doesn't necessarily mean that circle in the middle of your soap that you get. It means there are different stages of gel, and recently I had a soap that I saw the whole thing go through gel. It still had that look of partial gel, it had that circle in the middle. And the same with these, there's different stages of gel. and it's not just that circle. So keep that in mind. And also, I turned the oven off way too late. I probably didn't even need the oven, honestly, for this, and I think it still would have done what it was supposed to do and go through gel. So if I were doing more experiments with this, I would not put it in the oven. I would leave it out on the counter, and I would probably not cover it. And I lucked out to be doing this in the fall time when it's not as humid here, because I know I definitely would have got soda ash on the high water parts if I would have done this in the summertime. Also, on the topic of gel, keep in mind that it's always going to be a little warmer in the center than on the top. So if you stop the heat at the point where the top looks good, it's going to be too late probably. So like I was saying earlier, I should have not used the oven, or I should have turned off the oven way earlier. So just keep in mind that it's warmer in the middle of the soap than on the top. Okay, I do have 2 other photos that I shared from other batches, and the last photo is from the batch that I used for the entry for the soap challenge. If you're interested, I have a Facebook group that's for learning, and it's a private group, so you need to ask to join and you need to answer a few questions before I let you in. But it's for sharing and it's for learning and troubleshooting, and I've included the link in the first comment below. Thank you so much for sticking it out to the end of the video with me, and I really appreciate all your comments and your likes. And if you want more information, check out the description below. And while you're clicking around, you can hit the subscribe button and the bell if you want to be notified the next time I post a video. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and I'll see you back here next time.